Some basic information about the course that you typically expect in the CIF is given here. There is no lab associated with the course as yet. This is the objective. Basically, the various components in the power system, how do they work? That is the purpose of the course. How transformers work, how DC generators work, how DC motors work, how AC generators work, how AC motors work, and finally, how the power systems work. Generators and motors are combined together under a single word, machine. Generators produce electrical output and they take rotary mechanical power input. The electrical output could be AC or DC. If it is AC, then we call it AC generator. If it is DC, we call it DC generator. Motors take either AC input or DC input and produce rotating mechanical power, rotary mechanical power. So generators and motors have the opposite functionality. In a lot of cases, the same machine could work as a generator and a motor, although it may not work equally well in both the applications. Course outcomes. Number one, analyze and calculate the performance parameters of single phase and three phase power systems. Typically, so far I believe you have been handling circuits and systems with a single voltage input or single current input, and that is called single phase. For power systems, it has been found that it is a lot more economical if we generate power, AC power, using three generators connected in particular configurations. And that is called three-phase power or three-phase systems. So we will spend a lot of time in the beginning to first review the single-phase systems from the power and energy point of view. And then we would move on to three-phase systems, which are the backbone of modern power systems. I'll explain why three-phase systems are preferred over single-phase systems, especially for high power generation and transmission. So that will be the objective or outcome one. CO2 is about transformers. You will go through a bit of analysis, in fact, quite a bit of analysis of a typical transformer, and then how you calculate the performance parameters by drawing approximate equivalent circuits, how you experimentally characterize the performance, and so on. There will be a lot of things that I will be speaking about when it comes to transformers. Normally, at the end of CO2, we end up in the midterm exam. So there will be around 20 lectures for CO1 and CO2 together. After the midterm exam, wait a minute, yeah. After the midterm exam, we will begin with DC generators and DC motors. Maybe not. Let's see. But this is one of the objectives. We can always switch the preference from one to another. Okay. But this is one objective typically that is going to be completed, whether before the midterm or after the midterm. Sometimes we do DC generators and DC motors first, then we go to transformers. Sometimes we do it the other way around. It all depends. But these two have to be done, and one of them will definitely take you to the midterm exam. Then we move to AC machines. That means AC generators and AC motors, both single phase and three phase. And finally, we have the two objectives that talk about the power system as a whole. There's no point me going through each and every line right now because it will probably not go well with you. But power systems have their own peculiar design and operational and design and operation related issues. If something goes wrong, how does power system recover quickly? That's a big issue actually. Short circuits happen all the time. How do you mitigate their effects without damaging too much equipment and so on? So all this will be taken in the second half anyway. Before midterm, all this will not be taught. Now, you will get the CIF from me after the lecture is over. Basically, we will begin with a review of single phase systems, and then we will go to three phase systems in detail. Why three phase power? What is balanced system? What is unbalanced system? What is star connection? What is delta connection? There are 3-wire systems. There are 4-wire systems. There is a concept called power triangle. There is a concept called phase current, a concept called line current, phase voltage, line voltage, and so on. A lot of work there. This will be around 10 lectures. In fact, it will be a little more than 10, 12 lectures because initially I'll talk about the power system also, at least in a broader context. So 10 to 12 lectures will be required for unit 1. And then here we show generators and motors and transformers together as unit 2, but unfortunately unit 2 will not be fully completed before midterm. Either we will do DC generators and DC motors first and then we'll go to midterm. And then after the midterm, we'll go to AC machines and then finally transformers. That could be one way. And then, of course, at the end, we will talk about, as I said, power system from the operational point of view. Faults, how do you avoid faults? What are the protection devices that are needed to mitigate the effect of faults and so on? Stability of the system. If some disturbance occurs in the system, how does the system recover and so on? Unfortunately, there is no single book that I would recommend for the entire course, but some books are given here. And e-copies are available in all cases, I think. The grading age shown here, which age at least 2 will have 30% weightage. Assignments will be given, but you don't have to submit them. You have to do them well if you want to do well in the exams and in the quizzes. And midterm exam has a weightage of 25%. I will plan for 3 quizzes, definitely, because 30% is a lot of weightage. So 3 quizzes for sure. And end term exam has a weightage of 45%. Yeah. So that's about it. There is COPO mapping, etc., which may not be of interest to you. It is more of interest to us. How do you generate AC power? By the way, power systems that we are talking about are by default AC systems. DC systems are possible. It's not that they are not possible. But by default, we would assume AC systems. How do you generate AC power? Society needs a lot of AC power, for sure. How do you ensure this happens efficiently? We take natural sources of energy like wind, hydel, and in fact, sometimes artificially produced energy sources like gas turbines. Turbine is one entity which converts the, let's say, a natural energy input into rotary mechanical power. Wind turbines are there. They take the energy from the wind and generate rotation. Hydel turbines take energy from the water flow created by artificially built dams and then convert that energy into rotation. Gas turbines and steam turbines use high energy jets of steam or gas as the input and produce rotating mechanical output. These are mechanical engineering things. You don't have to know everything in detail about turbines, but at least be aware of the word turbine. Turbine converts natural energy input into rotary mechanical output. And that rotary mechanical output goes as the input to the AC generator. Basically, we use Faraday's law. A rotating conductor in a magnetic field generates an EMF across the two ends. You know that, right? So that theory is used with a lot of conductors coming together and connected in series and parallel and put on a cylindrical structure called rotor. And those conductors rotate in the presence of an externally provided magnetic field, and they generate a lot of EMF at the output. That is the basic theory. We'll be dealing with all this in detail anyway. But for now, take it from me that turbines take energy input from nature or sometimes from artificial sources also and generate mechanical rotary power. That rotary power goes as the input to the AC generator. This is how the generation is done. Boiler is shown here because in case of steam turbines, you'll have to boil water to get high pressure steam jets which fall on the blades of the turbine and rotate it. But if you are using wind turbine, then boiler will not be necessary, obviously. Now, generation is the first part and very critical part, of course. But then the second step is to transfer this high power to society. And not everybody is near the generating station. So you need transmission lines. You see them around you all the time on both sides of the road, at least on one side of the road. Now, it has been found that transmission lines operate more efficiently if we supply them with high voltages. The generators on the generating side do not produce very high voltage. They produce reasonably high voltage. It's not that they don't. Maybe 2 or 3 kilovolt and something like that. Or maybe even higher nowadays. But it's not high enough for efficient transmission over transmission. So what we need is transformers, which will step up this somewhat low voltage being produced by generators to a very high value, even as high as, who knows, 66 kilovolt and even higher. I'll show you numerical values later. But very high voltages are generated by using transformers before we supply the energy to the transmission. And transmission lines typically will be hundreds of kilometers long, maybe even thousands of kilometers long, to take electrical power to the destination, to the intended customer. On the receiving side, obviously, the voltage has to be step down. So we need a stepping down transformer. So that voltage is brought back to 220 volt or 440 volt that society wants. And then there is a lot of detail about the distribution of this electrical power. The entity that does take care of distribution will be a substation on the receiving side that would reduce the voltage to 440 or 220 volt or to both, and then will ensure that the voltage is supplied to the area under the control of that particular substation. Okay, so there's a lot of detail on the distribution side also. So typically a power system has generation, distribution, generation, transmission, and distribution as three conceptual stages. In practice, a fourth entity is also there, which is protective devices that prevent accidents, or if accidents happen, then they prevent the damage as much as possible. So generation, transmission, distribution, and protection devices. Four entities come together to build a typical power system. In our country, the frequency we use is 50 hertz, 50. In countries like US, the number is 60 hertz. Not a big issue. It doesn't change most of the things. The focus in this course will be on power and energy, but obviously you cannot do that until you talk about current and voltage. You know, current is rate of flow of electrical charge. The unit is amperes, which is coulombs per second. You know all this. Quickly, let's complete that. Voltage is nothing but potential difference between 2 points, which means work required in carrying 1 coulomb charge from one point to another. So joule per coulomb, that is how the volt is defined. Okay. And then power, which is volt into ampere. Power is a very important concept. By the way, in this course, you will see that a lot of mechanical engineering will be spoken about. Although you are electrical engineers, but in reality, depending on the career path you take, you may have to deal with mechanical engineers a lot. So I'll keep telling you about mechanical engineering aspects as we go. One important thing to remember is that power is a concept that is equally valued by mechanical engineers. We, of course, value it too. Power in electrical engineering or electronics engineering is defined as volt into ampere. In mechanical engineering terms, power in watt, of course, means joule per second. Joule is the energy. And I'll show you quickly in a minute that these two definitions are not contradicting each other. They are equivalent to each other. Energy is something we'll be talking about a lot. Energy, if the power is not a function of time, then power multiplied by time is energy. And if power is a function of time, then you have to integrate power over a certain period of time to get the total energy. Energy is measured in joules. Power is measured in watts. Okay. Well-known things. Yeah, one simple illustrative example here. Show that the definitions of power, voltage into a current, or joules per second, they are identical or they are equivalent to each other. The second definition is typically used in mechanical engineering. First one in electrical engineering. Let's see how it goes. You take the definition V into I. And V is nothing but energy upon charge. That's how voltage is defined. Work or energy to carry 1 coulomb charge from one point to another. That's volt. So energy upon charge, energy divided by charge is voltage, and current is charge divided by time. So multiply the two, charge cancels out. What you get is energy per unit time. That is exactly what mechanical engineers do in defining power. So the two definitions are virtually the same. Now, you know this AC and DC distinction very well. I don't have, this was written with mechanical engineers in mind. AC means time varying signals, and signal means current, voltage, power, or energy, any of them. DC means no variation with time, and AC signals mean periodic or non periodic. Periodic signals, of course, repeat themselves after a certain time period, which is known as time period, actually. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you with all these things that you know. Ohm's law, V equal to Ri, you know this quite well. Let me move faster. You can go through it carefully once you get it, but I think you know all this, so there's no point wasting time in going through each and every line. But one thing that I would like you to look at, just in case you're not sure even now, is this solved problem. Very simple. A 10 ohm resistor is connected across a 12-volt battery. Battery, by the way, produces DC voltage, but without using any mechanical input. It uses chemical reaction. So it's an alternative way of producing DC voltage. No mechanical input, no rotary mechanical input, no turbine, nothing. You buy batteries in the market. They are very lightweight and very easy to use. So that's one thing that we have to keep in mind, that DC can be produced by using non-mechanical means also. But AC cannot, as far as I know. For that, you need rotary mechanical. So 12-volt battery is connected to a 10 ohm resistor. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so the current that would flow will be 1.2 amperes, right? How much power will be consumed? I square R. So 12 multiplied by 1.2 will give you, I think, 14.4 watts. Now the question is, calculate the energy consumed. How much energy would be consumed by the resistor over a 45-minute period? So for that, you take this power value and multiply it by the time involved in seconds to get the answer in joules. I'm sure you understand this, but still I'm doing it once. Power is V into I, V square divided by R, and it's all easy to calculate. Power turns out to be 14.4 watts, no issue. To get energy over 45 minutes means multiply this power by 45 into 60. So that is the answer, 38.88 kilojoules. Another unit which is very commonly going to be used in this course for measuring energy is kilowatt hour, not joules. In fact, the electricity boards charge you money based on how many kilowatt hours you have consumed. Each kilowatt hour is called by them as 1 unit, and they typically charge 7 or 8 rupees for each unit consumed. So kilowatt hour is a unit you should be aware of besides joules for measuring energy. The definition is almost clear by the name itself. How many kilowatts power and for how many hours it has been consumed. Multiply the two numbers and you'll get kilowatt hour. Like in this case, if you convert this power into kilowatts, you'll get 0.0144. And you convert this time into hours. 45 minutes becomes 3 divided by 4 hours. Multiply those two. You will get the same answer in kilowatt. So there is a clear-cut relationship between joule and kilowatt. In fact, I have repeated that problem given in 2 as problem 3, where I have done the calculation of energy in kilowatt. Power is 0.0144 kilowatt. Time is 3 divided by 4 hour. Multiply the two, you get the answer in kilowatt. 0.010. So 0.0108 kilowatt hour should be same as 38.88 kilojoules. Obviously, there is a relation between these two units, and which is the next problem here. Derive the conversion formula for converting a kilowatt hour energy value to joules and vice versa. Easy to figure out. 1 kilowatt hour is 1000 watt multiplied by 3600 seconds. So 36 multiplied by 10 raised to the power 5 watt into second, and watt into second is joules. So 1 kilowatt hour is 3.6 into 10 to the power 6 joules. You can Google this, you'll find this answer in the net. And the opposite can be done very easily too. 1 joule is 1 watt into 1 second. 1 watt is 0.001 kilowatt. 1 second is 1 upon 3600 hours. Multiply the two, you get 1 joule equal to almost 2.78 into 10 to the power minus 7 kilowatt. Energy measurement is typically done in kilowatt hour, but for many calculations, we still need to use joules. That's why this conversion factor is very important to keep in mind. This should be easy enough. You can try it yourself. Problem 4 is very easy to figure. Problem 5, again, a simple calculation example on energy consumption. 200 volt DC source feeding a 78 ohm resistor. Calculate the energy consumed over a 2-hour period. You can easily go through these calculations. First thing I do is calculate current, which turns out to be 2.5641 amperes approximately. Then I calculate the power, which is I square R. It turns out to be 512.82 watts. Then I multiply the power by the time involved in seconds to get the answer in joules. And you can convert this answer into kilowatt hour immediately based on the conversion formula that we have worked out. So double check my calculations once you get the top. Should be straightforward, conceptual. Now one more example where power consumption is not constant, but it's a function of time. So you have to do the calculations slightly differently for energy consumption. A 200 volt DC source is connected to a 78 ohm resistor. You see, these calculations are important. Sometimes we understand theory, but important thing is how to do calculations correctly. In power system operation, quick calculations are required sometimes, So that's why I'm sort of exposing you to things that you may have known already, but worth having a second look. 200 volts source, DC source connected to 78 ohm resistor through a single pole, single throw switch. Switch is something we will be talking a lot about later in the course, but single pole, single throw switch is what you see around you all the time. When you turn on the ceiling fan, you push a button. That's a single pole, single throw switch. That means either it allows the current to go through or it simply doesn't allow the current to go through. Only two possibilities. It's either open or closed. Only single throw is possible to close the switch. Now, in this case, we have connected the switch between voltage source and the resistor. At zero time, at t equal to 0, the switch closes for 1 minute. So current will flow. Then the switch is open for the next 2 minutes. And we are going to avoid the transient response. We are talking about steady state responses here. So don't go into charging, discharging, and anyway, there is no capacitor here, so that's immaterial. But even if there were a capacitor, etc., or inductor, etc., I would like you to focus on steady state response, not on the transient response. So issue here is that initially the switch is closed for 2 minutes, then it is opened for 3 minutes, and then it is closed for 3 minutes. So three different modes are there, and after that the switch is opened again. Closage for 1 minute, open for 2 minutes, closage for next 3 minutes, and then becomes open. Yes. So for each of these time intervals, you have to calculate the energy separately and then total the results to get the total energy consumed over this 6-minute period. In the second case, when the switch is open, obviously no power will be consumed and no energy will be there. So that answer is 0. But the other two time intervals will have an answer which will not be 0. Okay, let's see how we handle this. In the first time interval, we have t equal to 0 to t equal to 60 seconds. Current obviously is 200 divided by 78 amperes. Power is easy to figure out. It turns out to be 512.8205 watts approximately. Energy will be this power multiplied by 60 seconds, and the answer would be joules. E1, energy consumed in interval 1, is calculated right here. And you can convert the answer into kilowatt hour using the conversion formula we have already derived. Check my calculations, of course. Now, in the second interval, switch is open. So no current would flow. So power will be 0 and energy consumed will also be 0. In the third interval, power will be the same as in interval 1, but time period is different. So we repeat the calculations and we get the energy consumed in the third time interval. The numbers are shown here. Then you sum up the results to get the total answer. So it's kind of integration of power over time. It is, of course, being done in discrete steps because power is constant over certain intervals. It is not continuously varying with time. Had it been continuously varying with time, we would be doing actual integration. But here, that's not necessary. Okay. Now, as I said, I'll quickly go through this, which is well known to you. Signal is a word we'll be using for current, voltage, power, and possibly for energy. Signals will be AC or DC. AC signals can be periodic or non-periodic. I don't want to waste too much of your time. You know all this. Let's move forward. A typical voltage signal, which is periodic, is written by the generic equation Vm cos omega t plus theta v. Omega is the angular frequency in radians per second, theta v is the phase angle of the signal, Vm is the peak value, and so on. I typically use small v for instantaneous values and capital letters I use for peak value or RMS value or even average value. Okay, and omega is 2 pi f, you know all that. Omega is also 2 pi divided by capital T, where T is the time period. Let's quickly go through it. Move on. And this particular representation, which is generic, depending on theta v value, it may give something interesting. If theta v is minus 90 degrees, you will get Vm sine omega t. If theta v is plus 90 degrees, you will get minus Vm sine omega t. So it's not that you'll always see cosine functions. Depending on theta v values, you may end up seeing sine functions also. Okay. This is the illustration of basic quantities involved in the waveform described by equation 1, where I have taken a specific case where theta v is minus 90 degrees. So in that case, it is Vm sine omega t, and that's how it looks. If you plot omega t versus small v, you will see 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and so on. If you plot small v versus time, you will write the time periods fractional values. Okay. Current signal, if it is periodic, is also described by a similar equation. Only thing is, you be aware of the notations that I am using. That is going to be very important as we proceed. For voltage signal, which is periodic, I am using theta v as the phase shift and Vm as the peak value. For current signal, I am going to be using Im as the peak value and theta I as the phase shift. Average value, effective value, and effective value is the same thing as root mean square value or RMS value. You know all this. I'm not going to waste too much of your time. But this document, I'll send it to you anyway. It's basically going to remind you about how to calculate peak value, RMS value, etc. for a given voltage signal or current signal. You will be bored if I go through details of each and everything. So let me quickly show you what you will get in this document. You know that the RMS value is peak value divided by square root of 2 for all periodic cases. And that is what I've shown here. DC value or average value is 0. You can go through these examples. By the way, DC value or average value, if you do it over a full cycle, then it's 0. If you do it only for half cycle, it will not be 0. That is what I've shown in some of the solved examples here. Because sometimes this course is taken by mechanical engineers also. That's why many things are being explained in detail for their benefit. Electrical engineering students do not probably need to be educated once again about all this. Okay, basic definition of RMS value, you know all this. So let's quickly move forward. Some solved examples, please go through that. One table which is actually going to be very useful to us is the outcome of all this. Depending on the waveform involved, these are some values. Again, you don't have to memorize them, but keep this table handy. In future, it may be useful in the course. If the waveform is purely sinusoidal, we know already that the RMS value or effective value is peak value divided by square root of 2. Average value, if taken over half a cycle, will be 2 divided by pi of the peak value. If taken over full cycle, it will be 0. And there is a factor called VRMS divided by V average, which is called conversion factor. It is 1.111 in this case. And yeah, this is something that is from the practical point of view. If you are measuring these quantities in the lab, what is the reading errors? What are the reading errors? They are claiming 0% here, which I somehow don't like, because 0% is not going to be true in almost any real life situation. You'll always get 1 or 2% error. But anyway, somebody has put 0%. Rest factor is another thing, which is nothing but a ratio of peak value to RMS value. That's 1.414 in this case. If the waveform is square wave, and that too symmetric square wave, then these are the numbers for these performance parameters of the wave. For triangular waveform, these are the values. And for this particular case, the last one where it is square wave partially and then 0 for the rest of the cycle, these are the numbers. So the purpose is that although we know the basics quite well when it comes to calculating RMS value, average value, rest factor, etc., a table containing the results of derivation is always helpful to keep with you. In any case, we are running out of time, so I guess I should not go any further. But now, from the next lecture onwards, I will be talking about power. Power is simply voltage multiplied by current, that's for sure. If voltage is a function of time and current is also a function of time, you take instantaneous values and multiply them together to get the instantaneous power. And that instantaneous power, like it or not, has quite interesting behavior, because you are multiplying two cosine signals together. And that is what I'm going to discuss in the next lecture. You will see that when it comes to power, things are not that straightforward. In many other courses, you have been taught a lot about voltage and current, but I don't think enough attention has been paid to the power aspects. Power, it will turn out, will have some time varying component and some non-time varying component, even though the voltages and currents are both time varying. This is what I intend to show next. And that is what makes power system analysis and design very interesting and challenging. So to repeat myself, the focus in this course is more on power and energy, although we will be using voltages and currents as the inputs.